tried to think of every single scenario possible of how the ROV was going to travel through the wreck and what was required. So we tried to package everything into as small a package as possible.
The design is so cutting edge that no off-the-shelf components could be used. Every part was designed and built from scratch. Jake and Elwood each carry 2,000 feet of fiber optic cable. Inside the cable are two tiny glass fibers, only half the diameter of a human hair.
I'd say we're about still 2 pounds negative. Probably want to dive it slightly negative.
Video of what the ROV sees, as well as flight control signals, race along the fibers as pulses of light. The delicate glass fibers are the pilot's only link to the ROV. Damage them and the vehicle is lost. Based on the blueprints from the shipbuilder, Jim and his team have made detailed diagrams of every deck of the Bismarck. With the help of the survivors, they're attempting to compile a list of access points to the wreck, which might be large enough for the ROV to get inside.
Start with where your workstation was, where your duty station was on the ship, okay?
Dienststelle zuerst. The secret encoding room.
Ah.
The wood deck, the outer deck, yeah.
I was stationed at the secret correspondence room, and my daily duties were to analyze any correspondence or intelligence coming from the outside. We never knew a thing down below. We were kids. Officers were like gods to us. We never asked, and we were never told. But we were allowed on deck as we got to Norway.
My duty station was the writing room, basic correspondence between stations with naval headquarters and the commanders-in-chief, where we would go when we would leave basic mail, etc. The adjutant's chamber was right next door, and he would dictate orders and other information to process. For example, when Hitler came on board on May 5th, his adjutant, Puttkammer, I believe, would be in correspondence with me, telling me when and where Hitler would come on board.
Admiral Lütjens took charge of our task force the week before we left. We hated Lütjens. Lindemann was a nice captain. We all liked him. But the atmosphere really changed when Lütjens came on board.
So, und was haben Sie mir jetzt zu erzählen? Ich mache Sie darauf aufmerksam.
Admiral Lütjens was known as the man in the iron mask because his face was always set like steel. There were never discussions with his captains. He simply gave orders, terse, sharp, to the point, no emotion, no feelings. Now, I'm the Bismarck on the 24th of May, 1941, and I'm coming out of the Denmark Strait with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen ahead. You're the Hood and the Prince of Wales. Over the horizon, I can just barely make out your two ships. This is just an incredible distance. We're both moving fast. I'm going at 27 knots. I can barely see your superstructure.
Imagine shooting that far. Feuer frei!
Hood and Bismarck turned toward each other at full speed, like two armored knights, charging.
Hood fires first.
Bismarck returned fire.
Feuer! Feuer frei! Feuer frei!
When you're firing at 27,000 yards, you're firing salvos. 4 or 8 shells. And you're trying to straddle the enemy's battleship. So you fire off and you're watching very closely from up in the director tower, and you see the splash of shells. And somebody yells, over, short, straddle. And the minute somebody yells straddle, you start pumping more shots in. On the bridge, they can only count the seconds as the shells fly. And you simply keep pumping in shells all around him, straddling him, still some short, some long, and then finally, the fatal hit. Hit! Hit!
The Hood's magazine has been hit. The explosion breaks the ship's back. As the Hood sinks, the forward gun crew heroically fires a final salvo. The Prince of Wales was seriously damaged and must retreat after firing one last salvo. There were 1,415 men on the Hood when it exploded. Only 3 survived.
Ja, das muss man sich tatsächlich immer wieder fragen.
From childhood on, I was taught that the English were our enemies. I never saw an Englishman. I never talked to an Englishman. And yet, they were our enemies. And when we destroyed the Hood, after all the hurrah and hurrah from the ship, we looked at all the sailors lying out there in the ocean. We didn't know how many had survived, but many of us realized they are human beings like we are, and wondered, why are they our enemies?
Walter and Carl have awoken before dawn to stand and honor the men of the HMS Hood who died at this moment 61 years ago. On that other morning, Carl, Walter, and the rest of the crew felt only the thrill of victory. They had vanquished the mighty Hood and bloodied the Prince of Wales. They were heroes of the fatherland. Bismarck was invincible. In England, the news of Hood's sinking was devastating. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England and fierce adversary to Hitler, understood instantly the terrible blow which had been dealt.
The reaction was one first of disbelief and then of a national tragedy. The Hood was almost a loved ship. She'd been adopted by the British nation. She was the symbol of the Royal Navy.
And now that symbol had been destroyed with what seemed contemptuous ease. It was a mortal blow to the English spirit at a critical moment. At that time, the English were terrorized by the nightly horrors of the Blitz, and starving as their supply lines were slowly strangled. The Nazi juggernaut seemed unstoppable. Churchill understood the stakes and responded with calculated fury. He pulled his naval forces from all points of the compass to converge on Bismarck.
There is absolutely nothing as vital to the nation at this moment as the destruction of the Bismarck. I don't care how you do it. You must sink the Bismarck.
I am getting very strong feelings. Memories are coming back the closer we get. And I can feel it in my stomach. Quite upsetting.
6 decades apart, Bismarck and Keltish are boring in on the same spot in the ocean, on the same date, and in virtually identical storm conditions. It is an eerie convergence. Bismarck pounded on through storm seas toward the coast of France and safety. The British forces were too far away to stop her. To Carl and Walter, it seemed they were home free.
We still had the hope we could make it. At least that was the case with me.
But fate proved fickle. Desperate to slow the juggernaut, the British launched a near-suicidal attack through the storm with biplane torpedo bombers. Incredibly, a single torpedo made a lucky hit on the rudder, crippling the ship so that it could only turn circles. The British Wolfpack closed in for the kill.
I heard in the radio room about how many ships were coming. More and more fleets were closing in, and that we were getting circled in. After that, the last ray of hope was gone.
On Keldysh, there's a different sense of anticipation building as they approach the wreck site, now only hours away.
Comes in there.
The expedition crew burns the midnight oil, preparing for the first dive. As a gray dawn broke on the morning of May 27th, the crew of the Bismarck tried their best to prepare for the coming battle. At 8:47, Admiral John Tovey, commanding the British forces, ordered his battleships, Rodney and King George V, to open fire. Rodney and King George closed rapidly, firing salvo after salvo. The cruisers Suffolk, Norfolk, and Sheffield soon joined in the attack. Shells tore through Bismarck's superstructure and its crew. In all, 2,876 artillery shells were unleashed toward the Bismarck. The merciless pounding lasted for an hour and a half, leaving Bismarck a burning hulk. But still, it refused to sink. In frustration, Admiral Tovey ordered the cruiser Dorsetshire to fire its torpedoes. They claimed 3 hits. 5 minutes later, at 10:40 a.m., Bismarck capsized and plunged into the abyss. May 27th, 10:40 a.m., they have reached the site of the sinking. In an unsettling parallel, the Keldysh arrives on the exact spot, 61 years later, almost to the minute. For Carl and Walter, the present collides with the past. On that other gray morning, thousands of their shipmates plunged into the depths and lie entombed now beneath them.
Im Namen der Kameradschaft Schlachtschiff Bismarck.
We, the survivors of a gruesome naval battle in May of 1941, on this day especially want to remember all those who died in this very spot on that tragic day. On this day, we wish to place a crown upon your heads, the crested crown of the forever moving sea. Peace on earth for all time and everywhere. Never again war.
It affected me very much looking down into the water and remembering what had occurred 61 years ago at this very site. Struggling for my life and to realize that I belong to the very few lucky ones that have survived this catastrophe.
So step 1 is we do a nice pass, nice shot all the way down. Step 2, we meet here, okay? And then we do some photography just in this area.
Because it is a war grave, the wreck may not be disturbed in any way. All forensic analysis must be based only on imaging. So the coordination of lighting and camera operations is critical.
Yeah, little moves. You know, we let the current drift back.
Zhenya Chernaev is regarded as one of the best submersible pilots in the world. If it can be done with the Mir, Zhenya will do it.
Can you land Mir on top of this hangar? think it's possible to find place